Welcome to Unshakable Belief. I'm Monica Azoulay. I'm so glad you're here. Wherever you're joining me from today, I want to invite you to slow down for just a little bit. Take a breath, set aside the distractions, give yourself permission to simply be present. This is a place where we investigate the stories, beliefs, and behaviors that have shaped who we become, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Because behavior leaves clues, and every clue brings us one step closer to understanding ourselves, living with greater freedom, and finding our way home to who our Creator designed us to be. So, welcome. Come on in. Let's begin today's investigation. For most of my life, I believed that being called strong was one of the greatest compliments someone could give me. If someone looked at my life and said, "I don't know how you do it," I smiled, quietly thanked them, and I wore those words like a badge of honor. Strength meant resilience, it meant perseverance. It meant I could handle whatever life placed in front of me. More importantly, it meant I was dependable. I was the person people could count on. Now, there's nothing wrong with being strong. In fact, strength is often one of the qualities we admire most in others. We celebrate the people who remain standing after unimaginable hardship. We applaud those who continue showing up when life becomes difficult. We tell them how inspiring they are. We tell them how resilient they are. We tell them how strong they are. The problem isn't strength. The problem begins when strength quietly becomes our identity. Looking back, I don't think I noticed when that shift happened. I couldn't point to one specific day or one defining conversation. It happened slowly, one experience at a time. Every challenge I survived reinforced the belief that I was supposed to be the strong one. Every responsibility I accepted strengthened that identity. Every time someone depended on me, the story became a little more deeply rooted. Without realizing it, I stopped seeing strength as something I possessed. I began believing it was someone I had to be. Now, that may sound like a subtle distinction, but it changes everything. When strength is a character trait, you can choose when to lean into it, when to rest. When strength becomes your identity, rest begins to feel very uncomfortable. Asking for help feels foreign. Letting someone else carry the weight can feel almost irresponsible. Somewhere deep inside, you begin believing that your value is measured by how much you can handle. The interesting thing about identities is that we rarely question them. We simply assume they're true. We say things like, "I've always been this way," or "That's just who I am." And we rarely stop long enough to ask rather what we call personality might actually be adaptation. We assume that we've discovered who we are when in reality, we may simply be looking at the version of ourselves that learned how to survive. Over the past few weeks, we've been investigating control. We've explored the possibility that many controlling behaviors are not flaws to be ashamed of, but adaptations that once helped us feel safe. When life felt uncertain, planning made sense. When chaos surrounded us, staying prepared made sense. When disappointment felt inevitable, trying to stay one step ahead felt like wisdom. Today, I'd like to take that investigation one step deeper because I don't think control is always about controlling situations. Sometimes it's about carrying responsibilities that were never meant to belong to us. Sometimes it's about believing that if we don't hold everything together, everything will fall apart. And if that belief has lived inside us long enough, we stop recognizing it as a belief at all. We simply call it being responsible. We call it being dependable. We call it being the strong one. But what if we've misunderstood strength? What if true strength has never been about how much you can carry? What if the stronger question isn't, how do I keep holding everything together? But rather, when did I begin believing that everything depended on me? I don't think anyone is born carrying that belief. It's learned, it's practiced. And eventually, I think it becomes so familiar that we stop noticing the weight altogether. This is where I want to begin today's investigation, not by asking how to become less responsible, not by asking how to become less strong, but by asking a much gentler and perhaps more important question. When did being the strong one stop becoming something you chose and start becoming someone you believed you had to be? As I continued asking these questions in my life, I realized something that completely changed the way I understood responsibility. For years, I thought the answer was better boundaries. If I could just learn to say no more often, if I could stop people pleasing, if I could stop trying to fix everyone, maybe I wouldn't feel so exhausted. Now, these are all good practices, and there is certainly wisdom in healthy boundaries. But for me, boundaries weren't the root issue. They were simply revealing something deeper. The real question wasn't, why do I keep carrying so much? The real question was, why do I believe it all belongs to me? That question led me to a distinction that has become one of the most meaningful ideas in my own healing journey. There is a difference between stewardship and ownership. Now, for a long time, I didn't know that those things were different. I believed that if something entered my life, it automatically became my responsibility. If someone I loved was struggling, I felt responsible for helping them feel better. If there was tension in a relationship, I felt responsible for fixing it. If someone was disappointed, I immediately searched for what I had done wrong. If someone I cared about wasn't growing, healing, or making healthy choices, I quietly accepted the burden of trying to influence an outcome that was never actually mine to control. My intentions were good, they were rooted in love, but somewhere along the way, love became tangled with responsibility. I wasn't simply loving people anymore, I was trying to carry them. The more I reflected on that, the more I realized I had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. I had confused stewardship with ownership. Now, stewardship is one of the greatest invitations that our Creator gives us. We're called to faithfully care for what has been entrusted to us. We steward our health, we steward our gifts, we steward our relationships, we steward our families, our work, our time, and the opportunities that we've been given. Stewardship asks us to be faithful with what is ours. Ownership quietly asks us to become responsible for what isn't. Ownership whispers that someone else's happiness depends on us, that someone else's healing depends on us, that someone else's choices somehow became our burden to carry. It convinces us that if we just love harder, prepare better, sacrifice more, or never let our guard down, we can prevent pain from touching the people we love. It sounds incredibly noble, even compassionate, but it is an impossible assignment. No human being was created to carry that kind of weight. As I began praying through this, I realized something that was both humbling and incredibly freeing. I had mistaken faithfulness for control. I believed that if I was faithful enough, I could somehow guarantee the outcome. But faithfulness has never been about controlling outcomes. Faithfulness is about showing up with integrity, compassion, wisdom, and love while trusting that the results ultimately belong to my creator. That changed everything because suddenly I wasn't asking, how do I become less responsible? I was asking, what has actually been entrusted to me? Very different questions. One creates anxiety because there will always be more to carry. The other creates peace because it invites discernment. As I look back over my life, I can see so many moments where I accepted ownership of things that were never mine. I spent emotional energy trying to protect people from consequences that they needed to walk through themselves. I replayed conversations in my mind, searching for the perfect words that would somehow change another person's heart. I carried guilt for decisions I didn't make and disappointment for outcomes I could have never prevented. I don't think I was doing those things because I was controlling. I was doing them because I cared deeply. But caring deeply and carrying everything are not the same thing. That realization has become one of the greatest gifts of my own healing. I can love someone without trying to rescue them. I can support someone without believing that their healing depends on me. I can tell the truth without taking responsibility for how someone chooses to receive it. I can pray for someone without believing I have to become the answer to every prayer. That isn't a lack of love, it's actually a deeper expression of love, but it honors the dignity, freedom, and responsibility that every person has been given. Perhaps that's what true strength has looked like all along, not carrying more, but carrying what is yours with faithfulness and trusting your creator with the rest. One of the things I love most about investigations is that it changes the questions we ask ourselves. At the beginning of this episode, we started with a question about strength. Somewhere along the way, that question became an investigation into identity. Now, as we prepare to leave this conversation, I think we're left with something even more important: choice. Understanding your story gives you something your survival patterns never could. It gives you choice. When we don't understand where our behaviors came from, we simply repeat them. We assume that they're permanent because they've been with us for so long. We believe that this is just who we are. But once we understand the story, once we begin recognizing the beliefs that shaped us and the experiences that formed them, we discover something incredibly helpful. We no longer have to live on autopilot. We have a choice. Now, that doesn't mean change happens overnight. In fact, I don't think lasting transformation ever does. I think healing happens one small decision at a time, one conversation, one pause, one moment when you choose curiosity instead of criticism, one moment when you recognize an old pattern and gently choose a different response. Those moments may not seem significant while they're happening, but over time they begin creating a completely different way of living. This week, I don't want you to focus on becoming a different person. I simply want you to notice. Notice the moments when you instinctively pick up responsibility for something that may not belong to you. Notice the conversations that leave you feeling responsible for someone else's emotions. Notice the sleepless nights spent trying to solve problems that only your creator can solve. And then pause, not to judge yourself, not to criticize yourself, Just pause long enough to ask one simple question. Is this mine to steward, or am I trying to own it? You don't have to answer perfectly. You don't have to get it right every time because this isn't about perfection. It's about awareness because awareness creates choice, and choice is where freedom begins. Before we close today, I'd love to invite you to continue this investigation with me. On July 28th, I'll be hosting my live Reset Masterclass, where we'll go even deeper into the stories, beliefs, and behaviors that shape our lives. If today's conversation resonated with you, I think you'll really enjoy what we're building together. You'll find all the details in the show notes, and I would love to have you join me. Before you leave today, I want to send you home with four things. The first is a question. What are you carrying today that your creator never asked you to own? The second is a practice. This week, every time you catch yourself taking responsibility for someone else's emotions, choices, or outcomes, simply pause and ask yourself, is this mine to steward, or am I trying to own it? You don't need to fix anything this week, just notice it. Curiosity is enough. The third is a resource. If today's conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to spend a little time with my book, The Lie is Loud. Many of the ideas we explored today grew out of my own journey of investigating the stories I believed about myself and discovering that healing begins with understanding before it begins with changing. And finally, I'd love to hear from you. One of my favorite parts of this work is hearing what people discover about themselves. If today's conversation gave you a new perspective, a breakthrough, or even a question you're still sitting with, send me an email, a message, or a direct message on social media. Tell me what you discovered. Tell me what shifted. Tell me what you're still investigating. I read every message because they remind me why these conversations matter. Every time I choose to share part of my story, my hope is that it gives someone else permission to investigate their own because stories create permission. And every story shared with honesty creates space for someone else to begin their own journey. Thank you for coming in today. Until next week, stay curious, tell yourself the truth with compassion, and remember, behavior isn't random. Behavior is evidence. Behavior leaves clues. I'm Monica Azoulay, and I will see you next week.